Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven Rodriguez. I'm your true champion, and that is right. In today's video, we are going to be judging, ranking, listing all of the top meta decks in the Digimon TCG Set 5 format for the global English version of the game. If you guys watched the video that I posted a while back on the top 5 meta decks, you will know that I only talked about 5 or 6 decks. In this video, I am talking about 27 different archetypes because that's how many that I think are viable in this format right now, that I think people are actually playing. And boy, oh boy, am I really excited to talk about all these decks, because I feel like the BT5 format is such a crazy format compared to the other ones we've had. The power ceiling for all the decks are just like on another level. Everything feels like it can kill everyone in like a single turn, and it's like crazy. Even though we have all these crazy powerful decks, how do we compare them to each other? Where do they stand? What's the best? What's the worst? Today, we're going to talk about all of that. If you guys enjoy these kind of videos and want to see more like it in the future, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. And if you guys want to check out awesome live streams like this in the future, be sure to follow me over on twitch.tv/TrueChampionSteven. Link down below, as always. With that said, let's hop into the tier list and talk about how this actually is going to work. So I have 27 different decks down here. I have the 4 different tiers that I will just sort of place all of these decks into. We have tier 1 being the first sort of row or column or group that we're going to have. This will be the best decks, the most played decks, the decks that are winning the most events. The second one will be tier 1.5 or fringe decks. These decks could easily be just as strong as the tier 1 decks, but for a multitude of factors, whether it be like one really bad matchup, a lack of popularity, or just like something they're missing that they might get in later sets, they're not quite tier 1 yet, but they totally could be, and they are just as strong, especially given like the right circumstances for certain events. And then tier 2 and tier 3 are kind of like the lesser known archetypes, the ones that people do play, but they don't play for the sake of trying to win events. They just play because they like them and because they are actually good. And if they get more support down the line, they could become broken. So those are all the tiers. These are all of our decks. Let's go ahead and get started by talking about all the blue decks that are currently in the Digimon TCG Set 5 format. Starting off, we have the blue decks: Ulforce V-Dramon, Blue Imperial Dramon, Hexablaumon, and Garurumon Tribal. Now, for Ulforce, this is both going to like consist of pure Ulforce decks or Hexablau decks that also play Ulforce V-Dramon as like a secondary boss monster or finisher. And I just put these here in tier 2 kind of like arbitrarily, but I actually think the Ulforce Hexablau version is probably the most popular version of this deck, but it's not one that I particularly like, because while Ulforce is really nice and can combo off really well, unless you play like bad cards like Arrow V-Dramon and certain tamers, it's really hard to like make this a consistent way to kill your opponent versus some kind of like Hail Mary to try to win the game. So it's not my preferred way to play blue as of right now. Hexablau, though, a pure version that like only plays hexas and like a ton of really cool draw supporters like Iba and Soren Joe for resources, is really cool. Just dig through your deck, get multiple Hexablaus established to win games is, I think, actually really good, and I'm putting it in tier 1.5. I do think these are interchangeable, but it just depends on like your own personal preference, and for me, this is technically better than this. Moving away from sort of like a mid-range / control style of blue, we have like the beat-down aggro versions of blue in Blue Imperial and Ancient Garurumon Tribal. I actually think Ancient Garurumon Tribal, sadly, is one of the worst blue decks and just worst decks you can play right now, because it just feels so fragile that everything that has removal, I think, has a chance to beat you. And unlike the red version, you yourself don't have really consistent removal. All you have is maybe 3 attacks in the late game, which sometimes isn't even enough to close out games. So I am not a big fan of Ancient Garu. I am, however, a really big fan of Blue Imperial. More and more people are jamming this deck ever since Dan Vang, I think, won that regional or Evo Cup with it, and it was super, super sick. I think this is a super solid strat and can punish people if they don't know or realize how aggressive this archetype actually is. And it did get some awesome boosts in the form of Coelamon, Omnimon Blitz, and many other cards from BT5 Battle of Omni, so I'm putting it at like the top of tier 1.5. Moving away from the blue decks, the ones that kind of I think didn't get the most out of BT5, we do have some red decks to talk about. I think the only ones I have on here are Greymon Tribal, represented by Blitz Greymon here, and Shoutmon or Shoutmon DX here. And I think both of these decks are actually super cool. I actually fought against a Greymon Tribal during like my last regional, and it was scary. Like things like Victory Greymon or Blitz Greymon being played for cheaper off of Nokia is really strong at like keeping up tempo and then setting up powerful Omnimon turns or Omnimon X antibody turns in certain situations. And as I'll talk about later, that card is really strong. However, I always judge decks in how good or how meta they are on two factors, popularity and power. And if you ask me, if you're playing a red deck this format, you're not playing Red Greymon Tribal on average, you're playing Shoutmon or Shoutmon DX. So, for that reason, even though I think the power is there, I have to give Red Greymon Tribal a tier 2 spot, and then I'm going to give Shoutmon DX a tier 1.5 slot, because kind of similar to Hexablaumon, it has a ton of really cool plays against some of the top or even rogue decks in this format, but it does have one glaring issue, which is kind of like Hexablau, like all your eggs are put into the big Shoutmon DX basket, and if you fight against something that like turns off your ability to attack, like Armageddon, or you get removed the second you actually attack with your Shoutmon, it is really hard to come back into the game. That's why I prefer to go for a more mid-range focused version of Shoutmon that focuses on board clearing versus like dealing damage, because you just want to keep up advantage and make sure that you can get like multiple Shoutmons online and then go in for game eventually. But that being said, it's still a solid strategy that a lot of people are playing, and I definitely think is worth playing in this format. So yeah, red did get a lot of fun toys, the big one being the Omnimons, the Nokias, and of course the Shoutmon lines. But that being said, we're going to now talk about the green decks of the format, which I think, as I talked about in my top 5 meta decks video, has kind of gotten a resurgence as this format has evolved because of A, the popularity of things like Yellow Green Ricky Rush, and B, people just forgetting that Nidhoggmon is a card. So the two like mono green decks I want to talk about are Green OTK, represented by Grand Kuwagamon, and Green Control, represented by Nidhoggmon. Now, I know both these decks do play Nidhoggmon, but Green Control is like the Rafflesias, the Mega Gargos, plus like the quad Nidhoggmon decks. Super solid strats. I think both are crazy viable. I mean, being able to slam Nidhogg, if you ever get that board wipe, I think you're walking away with a victory every single time, like I said back in my top 5 meta decks video. But I think the best way to sort of support that awesome advantage, that awesome control, is via a card like Grand Kuwagamon and the overall green OTK package, and being able to clean out security in a single turn or over a series of turns. Because sometimes in the BT5 meta, you do need to hit that aggro button if you want to finish a game before your opponent can kill you back. So for those reasons, I think that Green Control goes into the tier 1.5 category, and Green OTK goes into the tier 1 category as our first tier 1 deck in this format. Now, I know that green has a lot of issues in people's minds of like consistency, and that is very, very true. But you need to think about like best 2 out of 3s in like a 9-round tournament. If that deck can go X1 consistently, it's gotta be a tier 1 deck in terms of power. And if enough people play it and commit to it, it's gonna be tier 1 in terms of popularity. And I think green is one of those decks. More and more people are playing it, and I do think it's strong enough to take down events if it needs to, against like everything in this format. Like one of your worst matchups is like purple, and even then it's one of your best matchups because they kind of have to play into Nidhogg, since they have to commit things to battle area a lot of the time to get advantage. So I'm a huge fan of green, but in particular I'm a big fan of Green OTK, and then a big fan of Green Control. While we're on the subject of colors or archetypes that are on the rise in the BT5 format, I think it's time to talk about one of my favorite colors right now, black, and all the awesome decks within the color. Firstly, we have, similar to red and blue, we have black Greymon Tribal, because fun fact, Nokia works on every kind of Greymon and Agumon and Omni, not just the red or blue ones. We also have a D Brigade, big booster from BT5. We have Diaboromon, personally my favorite of the bunch, and sort of a newcomer / one that I kind of always knew existed, but haven't really seen people play to the extent that they are now. We have Turbo Black, popularly using things like Zwart Defeat and X Antibody to achieve devastating board states against like a lot of the big meta decks. Now, the one thing that I think Black has going for it that makes it like an absolute powerhouse is no one knows what any of these cards do. Like, it is the truest unknown archetype or archetypes in the Digimon TCG right now. No one knows what like Ultimate Flare does, which I'm like, what? It's so stupid. Or no one knows what X Antibody or like Black Metal Garurumon can do, or what like all the Diaboromon cards do. Like it's so awesome just seeing the look on someone's face when you go, yeah, play Armageddon, swing for game, or time to kill one of your dudes, attack, reboot, your turn. They're like, what? It's actually hilarious. So that's a really cool thing going for it. And I did kind of mention this too in my top 5 meta decks video, but like another really cool thing is how just strong and like resilient these decks are now to removal, because you can play things like Zwart Defeat, that if they remove, you remove one of theirs. You can play things like all your tokens to where if they kill one thing, you still have a bunch of other things on board. You have things like D-Brigade, where if something dies, they can just bring more stuff back. Like, Black decks are becoming more and more resilient and creating more beatdown style boards that can just set up crazy win turns against the opponent. And I do think they are as powerful as they've ever been, and people are finally starting to realize it. And as people are starting to realize it and people are seeing these awesome finishes by people playing Diaboromon and playing Turbo Black Defeat, they're going to start actually playing these decks and the popularity is going to go up. So with that in mind, I'm actually going to make sort of a predictory sort of judgment here on all these decks versus what I think is actually like currently represented in the meta. So I don't think right now these decks are as popular as I think they are, but towards the end of this format, towards the end of this month, towards like when store championships will happen, it will be like this. And these should be decks that you consider or decks that you shouldn't, depending on where they are. So I'll go sort of in order here. Black Greymon Tribal, I think it's the exact same thing as all these other tribal decks. It has some super solid turns, but out of all the Black decks, I think it has the least powerful turns, and besides a couple of diehard fans, no one's really playing it, so it's going down here in tier 3. I do think it's a bit better than Garurumon Tribal, simply because you have access to things like Zwart Defeat, which is a powerhouse right now against a lot of decks. The next one we're going to talk about is D-Brigade, which I think is kind of a heartbreaker of a one to talk about because it did get a lot of awesome toys. It got the blocker Commandramon, it got things like Ultimate Flare, it got both Zwart and Zwart Defeat that you can use pretty consistently, and it's like crazy strong, but no one is playing it to the point where it's actually seeing any success. I do think the power is there, I just don't think it's a deck you ever need to worry about when you're going into an event, so it's staying in tier 2. I actually think it's a little bit worse than Hexa Ulforce and Red Greymon Tribal. But moving into what people are calling the 2 best Black decks, and personally my favorite Black decks, we have Diaboromon and of course Turbo Omni Defeat. I'm automatically putting Turbo Omni Defeat in the tier 1 column. It is by far one of my favorite ways to play Digimon right now because you're literally just taking the way people are playing the game right now and flipping it on its head, and no one knows what to do. It's so strong, and if more people just wise up and start doing this, this deck will be dominating tournaments, I promise you. And then going into Diaboromon, the one bad thing about Diaboromon is that Lord Nightmon exists. It's literally the only bad matchup you have, and as I'll talk about later, it's one of the worst ones to have since the deck is so popular. But regardless, I am still putting it in the tier 1.5 slot because there are things you can do to beat the matchup, like playing Dark Side Attack, playing Promo Karamon, playing ways to make your Kurisarimons or your Diaboromons more resilient to removal, playing heavier Armageddon, the list goes on. I think the deck is solid and definitely worth picking up if you have not already, and so I'm putting it in tier 1.5. And I know I just went on a big old rant there, everyone, but I promise you, if you have ever had any doubts of playing Black, now is the time to get rid of them. Test the decks and take them to store championships and take your locals by storm and show them just what they're missing out on with decks like these. Also, if anyone here watching this video or in my chat ever wins a store championship with Diaboromon, be sure to tweet that at me so I can retweet it and just sing the gospel with you, because that's going to be super sick. All right, I am now leaving my soapbox and entering what is going to be the gauntlet of today's tier list. Like I said, we have 27 decks to talk about in total. I think like 9 or at least 8 of them are purple decks. So let's go ahead and get them in order. First things first, we have Lilith Loop, or as some people call Lilith Goo / Lilith Goop if you play Gallantmon. We have Dan Devi with like Defeat and like Digimon to like have like the craziest on deletion deck you've ever seen. We have Plutomon as like another way to abuse the powerful option cards in purple on top of things like Millenniumon or Omnimon Zwart. We have Chaos Gallantmon, kind of like the facilitator of classic Zwart OTK. We have Tactimon Turbo. You could see this as a Tactimon Omnimon Zwart deck, or you could see it as the purple version of the black Turbo Omni Defeat deck. On top of that, we also have things like purple Anubismon and Crest OTK, which are kind of like less level 7 focused aggro decks and more like level 6 / board spam / like combo oriented OTK decks. All those archetypes added together, we have 7 different purple archetypes that I think are like purely based in the purple color. Now that I've showed you all the different purple archetypes, let's talk a little bit about the best ones. So in the beginning of this format, the talk of the town was Zwart and how you can abuse Zwart and just kill your opponent with things like Lilith Loop or Gallantmon plus Tyne Macamia to get a bunch of removal and attacks and security checks in a single turn. However, as the format has evolved, more aggressive archetypes have been popping up, like, you know, Imperial, Rookie Rush we'll talk about later, more aggressive versions of Lord Nightmon, Green OTKs seeing more resurgence, etc. And decks that require as much setup or as much kind of combo pieces as Lilith Goop or Gallantmon are definitely going to be taking a hit. And honestly, my opinion has changed since my top 5 meta decks video. I no longer think purple is in the top 5 meta decks if you consider like all the different archetypes that exist. And for that reason, I'm putting both of them in tier 1.5. On top of that, I think things like Tacti Defeat are probably worse off versions of the Defeat deck because they have less good responses to things like Yellow Green Rookie Rush and green decks, while black does have good responses in the form of Reboot and Ultimate Flare. And then after those big 3, you kind of get into like the more boutique options of purple decks, definitely lesser played, but still pretty powerful. I know that Joe Dobby, a really prominent purple player in the community, loves the Dan Devimon like Zwart Defeat like on deletion party deck, but man oh man, does it feel just worse than playing like a Turbo Defeat deck or a black defeat deck. like trying to like get a free Dan Devi first before you get your defeat, or like make your defeat like even more threatening once it has an on deletion, just feels kind of greedy to me and isn't that powerful. And I think a lot of other people agree, and so they don't really play it that much. So I'm gonna like put it in tier 3 for now, even though I do think it's cool. I'll put it above these guys because I do think it's like a snazzy deck. In that same vein, I think like having like gimmicky style purple decks are kind of like fading away. Like you want to just go hard consistency all the time. So I feel like Crest OTK and like Anubismon are kind of like hitting the bottom of the barrel when it comes to being consistent, but also kind of being aggressive. Like it's one thing to like have all these attacks in a single turn. It's another thing to do something advantageous with it in the early game that can actually like threaten your opponent versus like just hopefully set up some kind of crazy combo out of nowhere. And then there's Plutomon. There's always going to be crazy fun things you can do with Plutomon, but for some reason, no one ever wants to play this card. I actually think it's super cool and could totally see tons of wins. Things like Hell's Gate and Earth Crusher or Earth Shaker are super strong. Playing things like Millennium on this deck too to like capitalize on just so much advantage that this card can create is really sick, but just no one's doing it. And so I think it's also in tier 2. So yeah, as a result of the ever-growing like issue of having too many options for purple decks and requiring some kind of like weird commitment / expertise from the person playing the color, it's just going down and down and down in terms of numbers, in terms of win ratio, and in terms of good matchups. So I do think it's on the decline towards the end of this format. Now that we've talked about what I believe is the biggest mono color or color section of this tier list, let's talk about the smallest one, or one of the smallest ones, the hybrid decks that exist in this format. There's really only 2. There is Security Control, either a yellow base or a red base, but still playing new things like Zwart Defeat, new removal cards like Transcendent Sword, Ultimate Flare, etc. And just has like the newest resurgence of the true control archetype in Digimon. And we have, of course, the bane of everyone's existence right now, yellow-green Rookie Rush. These two decks are the hybrid decks, and I think they're both tier 1. Just like straight up, they're both tier 1. Weirdly enough, like this one can like counter this one, and because this one's being played so much more now, this one becomes a better meta call for events. That's just the way things can work sometimes. But originally at the beginning of this format, more people were playing this and less were playing this, which I thought was weird given how many people were playing purple at the time. But because purple, like I said, is kind of like on the down trot right now, I think yellow security control again becomes even better because, like, if there are no Zwarts running around against you, you're like a happy camper as a security control player. And if all you're fighting against is Rookie Rush and Lord Nightmon, and you have Plasma Stake and Valderarm access, like, you're partying. It's like real good for you. And then of course, Yellow Green Rookie Rush is just crazy right now. The new cards we got, like Starmon's, Spiral Masquerade, etc., leads the deck to becoming more of like a mid-range tempo deck that also has like a hard aggro button whenever it wants to. It's just insane. And with all that said, I do think both of these decks are better than both of these simply because of their power scaling and of course how many more people are playing them. I think the toss-up could be like who's like truly above who in this one. I think it can go back and forth depending on the event you're playing in, but given it's easier to play Rookie Rush and like more accessible for people, I think it's going to be played more often, and so it's going to be a little higher placed than Security Control for now. All right. You know, as a yellow fanboy since the beginning, I have been a huge fan of the yellow supremacy, but having 6 yellow-based strategies, which I believe 4 of which revolve around like a single card, is insane. So let's talk about the best yellow decks. Firstly, we have the Lord Nightmon variants. We have standard Lord Nightmon plus /Andromon. We have Lord Nightmon Mastemon, personally my favorite for doing well in bigger events. We have the newcomer in Star-Lord or Starmon's Lord Nightmon that plays like Meteor Shower, Super Starmon, and like regular Starmons to like cheat stuff and play. It has a very like Rookie Rush feel to it with like heavy spirals. It's really, really cool. And we of course have the nice homage to BT4 in War Greymon, Lord Nightmon. All these decks pretty much do the exact same thing as they just rely on the overall advantage and pressure that Lord Nightmon can create, but you have some alternate like boss monsters or alternate like game plans against whatever meta you expect to fight against. So like if you expect to fight against like really wide setup kind of textured boards, going for the classic list is really good because you have a ton of DP reduction. But if you're worried about mirror match and want to close games out faster on top of all your natural removal, playing things like Mastemon or War Greymon are nice because they can get you that extra damage you need out of nowhere to just like finish off a game. But if you want to like just flip the game on its head and play a completely different strategy that it like has like a top end of Lord Nightmon, then you play like Lord Nightmon Rookie Rush or Lord Nightmon Starmons, right? So all these decks, while they do have like the same themes, definitely have different playstyles and definitely like different scenarios in which they see themselves winning the game. And because all these decks really need to do is just play Lord Nightmon and they can win like 80% of the time, they are very attractive to a lot of competitive players, especially those that are confident in their ability to play this deck. So with all that said, all 4 of these decks are, in my opinion, tier 1, as they are pretty much all representative of the greater Lord Nightmon strategy. The only question is, which do I think are the best variants in like a generic vacuum? Like I said, the best version I think for doing well in bigger events is the Mastemon version, specifically because of how good it is in the mirror match, especially if you play Zwart Defeat. I've talked a lot today about how crazy strong that card is, especially against decks like Lord Nightmon, because the second it comes into play, it just stymies them and like freezes them like a deer in the headlights. They're like, how do I deal with that card? And this deck can do that while also milling security, playing a wider board and making it like more resilient to removal. So I do see it as like a better version than the classic. Then we have the newer Starmon's version. Not that many people play it, but those that do realize how crazy strong it is. It's basically Rookie Rush, but you also play Lord Nightmon. So it's a really nice, like, fun addition that can just kind of steal games and can set up some really interesting board textures. So right now I'm kind of iffy on whether or not it's like the best version of the deck or like one of the worst ones. I do think it's strong and has a really nice matchup spread overall against everything, including the mirror match. So I will kind of put it above the Slash version, even though technically the Slash version has the best shot of beating it, given how much like wide removal it has access to. And then finally, we have the War Greymon version. I think it's the worst one. I think War Greymon is not like the best card ever. If you want to have extra aggression, just play Mastodon. It's more guaranteed. You don't need to live when you actually attack the security, and you can play things like Zwart Defeat. So I'm actually not a big fan of this one, and it actually sucks against things like Rookie Rush. So even though it is a Lord Nightmon deck and super strong, I'm putting it below things like Security Control and Rookie Rush because it just feels awful in general to ever go for War Greymon instead of going for Lord Nightmon. And yeah, that's what I think of the Lord Nightmon decks. As I said in my top 5 meta decks video, these are the decks to beat. They are the king of the hill right now. If you do not have a game plan for fighting against at least one or two of these archetypes, you are probably not going to have a fun time at events. Now that said, these are not the only pure yellow decks that exist. We do have others like Shine Greymon. We do see him being played by some diehards out there, and I do respect the hustle a lot. And it actually does have like some pseudo good matchups against like Lord Nightmon or against like setup heavy decks like purple, for example. So I actually do like it in like a meta call kind of sense. But it still has all the same problems of everyone knows how to counter you, they just don't attack, and then they set up gigantic OTK turns with things like Zwart, or things like Grand Kuaga, or things like Valder Arm, plus all the like bodies you can build in Lord Nightmon. So even though it does have some good on paper matchups, when you actually play with the deck, it can be really difficult to win sometimes. So I'm kind of putting it in tier 3 with like the rest of these really cool on paper decks, just not really cool in practice decks. And then finally, I have a Bushy Agumon here. This is to represent a mono yellow version of Rookie Rush versus a version that plays green cards like Needle Spray, Puppetmon, Lyle, Aurora, etc. And that's because you can do things like play TK and play Blinding Ray, or play things like Lobomon plus Davis to have like extra attacks that let you win the game faster versus like solely rely on keeping your board alive long enough to attack enough times to win. The one bad thing about the yellow-green version is there's no way just to flash damage in play unless you like splash in a Bushy engine, which is really hard in the hybrid version, but really easy in the mono yellow version. So it's just like another form of Rookie Rush. I don't think it's as good, and I don't think that many people play it, but some diehards like Mario, for example, do use it and do really well with it. So I figured it was worth talking about as like an example of some other things you can do with known archetypes in this meta. I'm putting it in tier 1.5, a little bit below Imperial Blue, because I feel like Imperial Blue is a bit better and more consistent at like getting that multiple attack aggression off, and that's kind of like how I see this version of the deck. You do still play things like Heavy Spiral and stuff, so you do have that like board control aspect, but I just don't think you kill people as consistent as you think you do. And yeah, guys, here we are. We have the finished product of our tier list. I don't think I have any like real rearranging to do. Like I said, this is kind of like arbitrary what's happening within the actual rows. I'm just doing it as more of an example for you guys. If you wanted to like list out the cards in order, like it would go like from left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right, from best to worst. But really, all of these things like in the top half, I think are super awesome decks that can take down any event you go to, especially if you're confident in how strong they are. The only stretches, or the ones that I don't think would do well, are the ones down here, and that's merely because of the matchup spreads they have, / the overall consistencies and just like issues they have when it comes to really playing in this format. On all of the big takeaways, though, if you want to do well and dominate store championships, DC1 Grand Prix, and the like, you need to have a game plan against all of these top tier 1 decks, and you need to be able to beat them, or at least fold to the ones that you don't think you're going to fight against. And if you can do that, I think you'll find a lot of success, and that's where I think the real value of videos like these come from. It comes from being able to actually paint a picture as to what this format looks like, so you can make more accurate and informed decisions moving forward for what decks you play in events. So yeah, guys, that is what I think of the BT5 format right now. I think this is like the most decks I've ever had in the tier 1 and tier 1.5 spot respectively. Again, like paying a testament to just how powerful decks are nowadays. Like all of those decks have so many crazy ways to close out games and win. It's insane. Some are better than others given what other people are playing, and that's why we have a distinction. But yeah, if you guys did enjoy and got any value out of this video, be sure to let me know by smashing that like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. And if you ever want to be a part of awesome live streams or moments like this in the future, like these beautiful people, be sure to follow me over on Twitch. Link is down below as always. I cannot wait to see y'all in there. But with all that being said, I've been your true champion, Steven. Please be sure to work hard, rest easy, live well, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and I will see you all next time. Peace!